Hello and welcome back to round 2 of our local Whisky Heroes Highness birthday tasting. We're doing some historical comparisons of well-known malts, and we're going to start from where we began our blind session, which you may or may not have caught up with. Please do if you have not. It's where we made a best guess. And the value of best may be debatable in some of them, but damned it, we did it anyway.
Yes.
Of the lineup. But now we're going to get into the real meat of the exercise, and we are going to try, for all 4 of these quite well-known, quite luminous whiskies here, examples from the present day, and by and large the 90s. So we'll consider the 90s its own kind of ill-defined space, but that's where most of these historic bottles are going to fall, as does this one. This one, as you can see, is Longmorn, a whiskey that we have tried on this very channel. Not that it did us any good on the blind tasting, but never mind.
It was one of our whiskies of the year for 2022.
It's a tremendous whiskey, or at least the modern version is. So ask most people in the street about extremely nerdy Scotch whiskey questions, and they'll say, "What?" But ask most Scotch whisky people, and the general consensus is that most whisky's gotten a bit more staid and a bit more boring as the years have gone on, and that's due to a lot of factors. That's due to the I almost said the death of sherry, and there might be slightly too real regards that. So we're going to watch we're going to observe the creep of that moving in as we go. Approximately, goodness, what is that? How old are we, Dave? We'll call that about a next to a 30-year stretch in time between here and the 90s. Obviously, we're not going to be familiar ourselves with any of these 90s versions because we were children in the 90s, and we were presumably not drinking a great deal of whiskey. I can't speak for Dave, but I wasn't. So,
I turned 16, 17-ish at the end of the 90s.
Yes, so a bit early to get on the boat there, so we will just have to do a bit of catching up. So let's see what we've got here and do a bit of a comparisino. This, of course, is the modern one, and I've got to say the packaging got better. This is some of the quality packaging we've seen in maybe any whiskey we've had on the channel. Maybe a Glenfarclas family cask might beat this one, but goodness me, it's really, really well produced.
So, a few differences with the classic, like a slight reduction in the ABV. This one being a 45 as opposed to a 50. And obviously the difference in age as well, 15 years versus 16 for a contemporary offering. That's to be expected, not going to have the same patterns or trends over time. A lot of the classic 90s whiskey hallmarks on here, the randomly italicized or otherwise changed in font on the blurb.
Ooh, classy.
A reminder that it's matured in oak casks, as if there were many other options for kinds of wood. And no URLs, no advice on recycling, none of the other...
Pregnant women going nuts.
Yeah.
Driving, who cares? It was the 90s.
Yeah.
But otherwise, the whiskey looks, colour-wise, as we'll see in the glass, I think it looks pretty similar.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This one bottled for the Australian market. It's imported by Seagrams.
Right, what have we got?
Here's cork. Keep that nice and secure. We have the new versus the old. I'm just saying that to reinforce it in my own mind so I don't mix them up like some sort of chump.
So we've just tasted all the new examples, so they should be pretty fresh in our mind. But just in case... Oh, yes indeed. Lovely heather, honey, buttery, fruity... little bit of lovely flaky pastry going
especially
on.
with all the air exposure it's had now.
This is. I'm going to say now that this is caught up, this is tasting a lot more like our example from last year. That was almost our whiskey of the year. But the older one, which has been waiting a very long time.
That's a little drier now. It's a little dustier.
It's a little drier. We should be anticipating in all of these just a little bit of bottle age, because 30 years is still a pretty long time for something to sit anywhere, and even under the absolute best of conditions the whiskey will change, so it's not going to be an absolute, we're not watching, what was that show, Quantum Leap, I don't know, we're not actually going back in time to taste this as it would have 100% tasted when it was bottled. There is going to be a bit of change, but it should be minor. So drier and a little bit more mineral. I think there's that oily warmth and generosity isn't quite as apparent on here. So full strength on the palate.
Ooh, that's hot. Got a bit of an acid burn to it.
That's got a kick, all right.
Oh, yeah.
That's got a hell of a kick. For
It's
15-year-old whiskey.
45% ABV too, a curious strength, but it was quite stronger than the norm back in the 90s anyway, when 40 or maybe 43 would have been the norm, I expect. 40 especially.
Yeah, it would have been a curious strength for sure. That is remarkably lively. All right, with water, this one makes more sense. This one makes more sense with water. There's a... I'm not sure if I'm all the way ready to call this a peat, but there is an angular quality to this one, which I don't think exists.
Yeah, maybe in a portion of peat and malt there. Perhaps historically there's less sort of discernment about the malt. You took what you could from various suppliers, and you'd have some peated element.
And I would need to look this up in more detail. It may be how the stills were fired back then. There may be direct firing of the stills, which was then converted.
Could be anything from coal to timber, right?
Well, I don't think it's quite old enough for coal, even in the 90s, although it's the change was quite rapid, so it is entirely possible it was. But yeah, there's a smoke in there that's coming from somewhere. I'm just not quite sure where. So comparing colour, which I should have done a lot earlier, the older, I think, is just a hair paler, and it's not clouding. Not clouding with water. So it's possible they were chill filtering back then, and they have ceased, which would be a good, that'd be a good step up in quality.
I go for a quick side-by-side tasting.
Yeah, definitely oilier. And that might go hand in hand with the lack of chill filtration.
Yeah. The new one, it's sweeter and it's richer. The older is slightly sharper and slightly lighter body.
I think that's probably what it is. I think we're probably seeing the effects of chill filtration versus non. And that's quite a succinct exercise in what chill filtration takes away or conversely adds to a whiskey. And I still think it depends on your individual palate whether you like the change or you don't. But this certainly demonstrates what it sort of strips out of a whiskey, and it is that texture. It's that really round quality, that sort of that oily, that's where you get that pastry note coming from.
It's the heft, the oil, the even it's weightier than the water or just the ethanol.
That isn't to say this isn't a pretty spanking whiskey, because this is, I should be rinsing here. This is no slouch. There is a dynamic quality to the fruit in this one, which makes me think this has been in some pretty interesting casks. This has been in some pretty fruity sherry casks, I think. So the real question is, which one do we prefer? And I think, and I'm not sure if this is going to be the through line, I think it's probably going to be the opposite. I think I prefer the modern version. But I think the modern Longmorn is popular because it's better, because it's improved. I keep hearing again and again just how modern and how craft forward a thing the Longmorn was. And I forget exactly what we scored it, but it was bloody
well
high.
Into 90s.
It was well in the it was a low 90s, but 90s ain't no slouch around here. We're not, we ain't other whiskey reviewers or something. 90 means something around here. This one I wouldn't rate too far behind. And rating unobtainable whiskey is probably a bit pointless, but as a point of reference to how much we like it more than the other, this one's very, very close, but it's not quite in the 90s. It's not quite in the 90s because it just lacks a little bit of... It lacks some of the layers that the other one does. I think the chill filtration has robbed this one of a little bit of its character. If I could somehow magically put it back in, it would be that much more interesting comparison. But I think that absence of the butteriness, that buttery, oily goodness, has knocked it down to an 89. And thus, I prefer the modern statement. So what do you know?
Yeah, I'm in a similar realm. The lighter body and that curiously bitter and acidic note just drags it down for me. So to be like about an 86.
Yeah, fascinating. Absolutely
still
fascinating.
Absolutely the sort of thing you should try if you get the chance, because it's a proper time capsule. You're tasting the evolution of a brand, of a whiskey, across the decades.